and welcome to the show. It is Monday night, and as you can see, I am decked out in my Navy gear. I was doing an event earlier today, a Zoom event for veterans in my area, and so I was decked out in my Navy gear, and rather than change out of it, I decided to just kind of leave it on. I'm very proud of my Navy veteran status, and I had a great time in the Navy, so it's President's Day. I know I'm supposed to probably do something like related to President's Day, but I'm not. I am wearing my Navy gear. So we've got a lot to cover today. The main two topics that I want to go over today is I want to address the story that came out just a little while ago about the Los Angeles Police Department being caught out with the circulation of a meme about George Floyd, and I will talk a little bit more in detail about that. Second thing I want to talk about is the other major thing that's kind of occupying my mind, which is the plight of my Texan brothers and sisters at the moment who are going through some stuff, and we're going to talk about that as well. And of course, we've got your great questions and some answers. So let's get to it. The first thing I want to talk about is this meme that is circulating through the LAPD. Now, it should surprise you not at all, that there are police departments that were actually celebrating the assassination of George Floyd. And in this particular circumstance, there's an investigation ongoing about police officers that were circulating a Valentine's Day meme that had the phrase under the picture of George Floyd that said, "You take my breath away." And it was meant to be funny, but it was also meant to be dismissive and meant to be disrespectful and meant to not see him as a human being. And obviously, police officers received this meme in their emails. Some of them shared it, and some of them probably just didn't say anything about it and think about it. And before I get to how the LAPD is responding to this, I want you to know that this is by no means the first time something like this has come up. And if you were to Google, you would see that not that long ago, the Miami Police Department ended up in a very similar situation in which racist emails, memes, photos, incredibly disparaging stuff, incredibly frightening stuff was shared and co-signed and laughed at and talked about amongst the Miami Police Department. There was an investigation. I do believe there were some folks who actually ended up being moved out. I don't know if it was the actual police officers themselves. I think it was really more some leadership changes that took place. But I wanted to talk about this for two reasons. I wanted to cover, first of all, the most important question about whether this is or is not a disciplinary issue. And the reason I think it's important to talk about that is that disciplinary issues are really part and parcel of the collective bargaining agreement. Almost all these police departments are unionized. And they all have collective bargaining agreements. That's part of being in a union. A union negotiates your terms and conditions of employment. But in the labor law spectrum, there are actually places that are, parts of the relationship that are viewed as something that is negotiated between the union and the employer. And then there are things that are viewed as exclusively in the purview of the employer, that they don't have to actually negotiate with the union or anybody else about it, right? And the reason for that is because the employer is solely responsible for the product as it faces the customer base. And they don't allow a union to tell an employer about what the product is going to look like. That is a privilege of the management and the ownership of the enterprise, right? Unions do not tell car companies what car to make. They can talk about the terms and conditions of the employees who make that car, but they don't have a say in the design of the car. They don't have a say in the marketing of the car. That's not where the unions insert themselves. And so there's this gray area about what is the product and is this something that affects the union? So for example, if you changed a product significantly such that you now needed fewer employees, is that something that the union would have the right to bargain over? The reduction of the members of their union. In some circumstances, you would say, yeah, they have a right to bargain over that. In some other circumstances, no. If, for example, you stopped making a product because the supply went out, you can no longer get cocoa from Morocco or something, then there's really no negotiating over that. The union can ask to negotiate about it, but our law basically says, hey, if the employer says we're no longer making this product because we can't make a profit on it, or we've got a supply problem, or we've gotten completely boxed out of the market because of some new entrant or whatever, that is purely within the context of the employer's decision making about the running of the enterprise. So the question here is this kind of overtly racist, white supremacist, callous disregard for life, is that a disciplinary issue, i.e. a sign of poor judgment? Or is it a qualification issue, i.e. you're not qualified for this gig? You can't deliver the product that this employer is selling, right? And we have all kinds of case law out there about what is and what is not a bona fide qualification. And we have some laws out there about how to accommodate people that may be qualified if they were, accommodated, maybe they have a disability, and you have to accommodate them and then they'd be qualified. But I'm here to say that I don't believe that a person can be trained out of the instincts that are represented by willingness to do something like that. They can choose not to act on it. That's true. But in the case of police officers, we put them in life and death situations, and where split-second decisions have to be made. And what we find is that if you're naturally inclined to have a disparaging or dismissive attitude about a certain kind of person, when you are put in the crucible of instant decision making about that person, their well-being, their right to live is not going to factor high enough for you to be cautious about taking their life. And if you were to look at the panoply of officer-involved shootings and officer-involved killings out there, they're almost always saying, I felt in fear of my own life. And that is almost always tinged with an abnormal or unjustified fear of the person in front of them, right? Now, sometimes it is justified. I'm going to admit that. Sometimes it's justified. But if you have a baked-in predisposition to not care about the individual that you are confronting, not to care about their life or their well-being or their right to live, then you're going to be far more likely to pull the trigger when you don't have to. Now, you look at a situation like Tamir Rice. The guy was 11 years old, right? The officer that confronted Tamir Rice testified that he thought he was in danger of his life, right? Because he couldn't see Tamir as a child. He saw Tamir as a black man. And to his mind, all black men were dangerous, ergo, I need to protect my life and, screw him. And the other thing that you will notice about a lot of these officer-involved shootings is that not only do they shoot this person, but they don't call for the ambulance afterwards. They literally stand over bodies and watch them bleed out. And this happens over and over again. In the case of Corey Jones in Florida, a case I'm very, very familiar with, officers shot Corey Jones five times, didn't call an ambulance, didn't call EMTs, just kind of let him bleed out. Now, to my way of thinking, a person who does not value Corey or Tamir as a human is far more likely to shoot, is far more likely to shoot to kill, and is far more likely to let that person die on their watch. And I'm sorry, but that's a qualification problem. That's not a judgment problem, because you cannot re-judgment someone about that. So typically what happens in situations like this is that the officer is disciplined or put on suspension or whatever, and they tell you, oh, it was just a lapse in judgment, I apologize, certainly I thought, this was just meant to be a joke, I didn't mean to hurt anybody, and, I would certainly never play into my decision making on the job, I would never allow, an attitude or something like this to color my judgment. Of course that's what they're going to say. Because it's unheard of for an officer to go into a disciplinary hearing and say, yeah, I don't like black people and I'm more likely to shoot them. Because they're not going to say it. even if it is in fact true. They don't say stuff like that. So the question is this something to be dealt with in a disciplinary context in which the union represents this individual and they have to go through an arbitration process, and 9 times out of 10 this police officer is given a slap on the wrist and put back to work after a suspension or some kind of, maybe even, admonition or censure or whatever? Or is this something far more serious? Is this your makeup as a human makes you incapable of doing the gig? I actually think it's kind of number one. I honestly think that if you find yourself to be a person who can have that kind of disregard for somebody's life, then you probably ought not be a person responsible for people's lives. Because we can never trust that your judgment is going to come through in a legit and honest and equitable way for everyone. And that is a real problem when we the people, we the taxpayers, imbue you with the authority to make snap judgments about who lives and who dies. When we give you that authority, we trust that you're going to use that authority judiciously and that you're going to do so equitably. And if we get rock solid evidence that you don't think that way, it's not our job to make you think right. It's our job to get you out of that role. And that's not a disciplinary question. That is a qualification question. And in the qualification world, that is not subject to grievance and arbitration, right? You just no longer can be a police officer. I wish that were the standard that's applied nationally, but that's most certainly a conversation we need to be having right now. If you like what you just heard, you can find out so much more and hear so much more on my Patreon channel, patreon.com/Pam Keith FL. That's where you hear the rest of this discussion, and there's lots more to share.